I know.
My ex leaned in close at the most expensive restaurant on the Upper East Side, his lips brushing my ear, and whispered, "I'm going to marry your sister." I felt the floor drop out from under me, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing it. 2 tables away sat Thane Ashford, billionaire, cold, untouchable, the one name that could wipe the smirk right off Eves's face. So I slowly turned my head and answered, "And I'm with Thane Ashford." I walked across the dining room and sat down across from the most powerful man in Manhattan, like I belonged at that table. I asked for 2 minutes of a lie. Thane looked at me in silence and offered me something that could destroy all 3 of us. Hi, I'm Kay. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Sentence Nobody Saw Coming. The night smelled of burnt butter and old money. It was the smell of Le Cygne, the French restaurant tucked inside a discreet hotel on 76th Street, where the carpet was thick enough to muffle footsteps, and the chandelier was heavy enough to muffle conversations. I arrived alone, in flats, in the black coat I'd bought when Holloway Events closed its 3rd corporate contract of the year, and I gave my name to the hostess without her needing to check the reservation. She already knew me. "Miss Holloway, table 4, as always." As always. That was how I'd been surviving the last 6 months. Routine, regular tables, predictable greetings, perfectly chilled white wine, and solitary dinners between one meeting and the next. I'd learned that grief doesn't have to be dramatic. It can fit inside a glass and be washed down with a forkful of fish. I hung my coat over the chair the hostess pulled out for me. Table 4 was in the second room, diagonal to the main dining area. From there I could see everything, a habit that came with running events. And at the back, in the corner closest to the wall, I saw Eves Pemberton with my sister. They were sitting side by side, not facing each other, like people who still needed to perform intimacy in public. His hand rested open on Cordelia's thigh, and the engagement ring she wore on her left ring finger, the ring that should have been mine, caught the low light of the candelabra and small yellow pulses. Her hair was in carefully tousled curls, freshly done that morning at the salon on Madison. I knew because it was the same salon that had done my hair since I was 23. I'd stopped booking there after the discovery. Cordelia hadn't. The hostess asked about the wine. I ordered the usual in a controlled voice, and dropped my eyes to the menu as if I were reading it for the first time. My hands didn't tremble. It was an old exercise, a 6-month-old exercise. The hum of the room rearranged itself around me as the waiter poured the glass. Conversations in 3 languages, silverware kissing porcelain, someone laughing in the back. I didn't look at their table again. I decided I was going to have dinner. I decided I was going to eat the fish slowly, order coffee, go home, sleep. I decided as if deciding alone were worth anything. He stood up 3 minutes later. I caught it from the edge of my eye. Eve had leaned in toward Cordelia, whispered something that made her smile with a small mouth, and then risen from his chair as if he were headed to the restroom. The path to the restroom at Le Cygne, however, ran through the side door on the opposite side. It didn't run behind my table. He walked behind my table. I had 2 seconds to understand. 2 seconds while his stride slowed. 2 seconds while the smell of his cologne, cedar, tobacco, vetiver, the same cologne of 2 years of my life, flooded the air of that quiet room. And then his hand grazed the back of my chair, and his mouth found the curve of my ear, and he whispered, low enough to be intimate, loud enough for the woman at the next table to turn her head, "I'm going to marry your sister." I froze. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pain. It was something stranger, deeper, like the moment you step into the ocean in January. The cold climbs up your whole leg before your head registers that it hurts. I felt my breath catch between the 3rd and 4th button of my dress. I felt my own fingers locked around the stem of the glass. I felt the woman at the next table pretending to look back down at her plate. And then I did the only thing I had left. I breathed. I breathed and looked straight ahead. That's how I saw him. 2 tables away, alone, black shirt under a charcoal gray blazer, whiskey in his right hand, sat Thane Ashford. I recognized him before my brain gave me permission. He had the kind of face that ended up on magazine covers whenever the market coughed. A year earlier, I had organized a private dinner for 12 guests at his penthouse. At the end of the night, he'd asked me out. I'd answered with a, "No, thank you. I don't mix work with that," so dry that even Wren had laughed about it the next morning. Since then, Holloway Events had turned down 3 approaches from Ashford Holdings. I sent Wren to the meetings. I didn't step on him, didn't think about him, didn't read news about him. That night, he was sitting 2 tables from me, and Eve was standing behind me with his mouth still close to my ear, waiting for the reaction he'd already pictured. The trembling chin, the hunched shoulder, maybe the first tear slipping out before I could lift the napkin. I turned my head, slowly, and I said in the most controlled voice I'd ever had in my life, loud enough for him to hear, low enough not to be a scene, "Am with Thane Ashford." Eve blinked. It was the only thing he did for 2 whole seconds. He blinked. His hand was still on the back of my chair, and I saw his fingers contract as if an invisible insect had landed on them. His mouth opened half an inch, closed, opened again. I didn't wait. I pushed the chair back, set the folded napkin on the table, picked up the glass by the stem with the calm of a woman being filmed by a camera she'd installed herself. I passed the sleeve of his blazer without touching it, a choreography I had never rehearsed, and that my body executed as if I had rehearsed it my entire life, and I crossed the heavy carpet of Lessine, diagonally, toward table 2. I didn't run. I didn't trip. The heels of my flats made no sound. When I reached Thane's table, he had lifted his eyes from his phone. He hadn't seen the whisper, but he'd seen the crossing. It was impossible not to have seen it. A woman in a dark dress walking, uninvited, toward his table with a glass of wine in her hand, was the kind of scene a man with his head stored away before he understood it. His eyes recognized me. I saw the exact instant, a fraction that didn't quite become an expression, a muscle at his temple that flexed, not his mouth. His mouth stayed still, but his eyes, yes, his eyes remembered. I sat down in the chair across from him. I set the glass on the table. I rested my hand on the white tablecloth. I tilted my head half an inch, enough to look like complicity to the room, enough to look like a plea to him. "Please," I said, without bothering to be polite. "Pretend for 2 minutes. I'll explain everything afterward." He didn't smile, didn't answer, didn't raise an eyebrow. He just looked at me for 3 seconds longer than comfort allowed, and then he turned his head toward the nearest waiter. "The lady's glass," he said in the low voice I remembered from a year before. "Will stay at my table. Bring the wine she was drinking. Please." The waiter blinked. He was a man I recognized the same instant he recognized me. Henri, the maître d' of Lessine. 2 years earlier, I had organized his daughter's wedding on Long Island. 80 guests, an outdoor reception. Henri had never forgotten the gift I'd sent the bride. He bowed toward Thane with trained precision, but his eyes came to me first. Surprised, then warm, then professional. "Right away, Mr. Ashford," he said. "Miss Holloway, it's a pleasure to see you again." He withdrew with the silent step of the house. Eves, on the other side of the room, still hadn't returned to Cordelia's table. He was standing in the middle of the carpet, his glass in his hand, and he had seen Henri bow in front of me. He had seen Thane summon him. He had heard the Mr. Ashford from across the room. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. Thane took a sip of whiskey, set the glass down, looked at me over the edge of the table. The light of the candelabra fell along the side of his face and drew his jaw as if it had been planned for the effect. He spoke quietly, unhurried, without affectation. "You crossed an entire dining room to use me," he said, "and you didn't even ask if I'd had dinner." I swallowed the sudden, absurd urge to laugh. "Did you?" "Yes." "Then that makes it easier." He nodded once, slowly, and stirred the ice in his whiskey with his mouth still closed. I couldn't tell if he was angry, amused, curious, or none of those. He was a man who trained his face the way an athlete trained his body. "Who is he?" he asked. "My ex. And her? My sister." Thane nodded again. It was the kind of nod that didn't comment. He set the glass on the tablecloth and, without looking at the room, without turning his head, fit his right hand over mine. His hand was warm. Mine wasn't trembling, but it was cold. He covered my fingers as if the touch were the most natural thing in the world, as if the two of us had been having dinner together for 2 months, and he had just decided to show some affection between the entree and the dessert. I held my breath. He noticed. He didn't say anything. "Henri," he said, in a slightly louder voice, "bring the dessert the lady likes, and her check together with mine." "Of course, Mr. Ashford." Eve went back to Cordelia's table at the back of the room. I didn't see him return. I didn't turn my head, but I felt the temperature of the dining room shift. I felt the murmur reorganize itself. I felt the executive at the east window look at me with a curiosity she was trying to hide behind her glass. Thane didn't let go of my hand. I looked down at his fingers covering mine and thought about 2 things at once. That I had just publicly lied about a life I didn't have, and that I needed to turn that lie into a manageable truth by April. "You owe me an explanation," Thane said, without letting go. "I know. Where do we talk?" "Anywhere I can think." Eve finished his dinner in 15 minutes, paid standing up, and left Lessine without turning his head toward us. Cordelia followed him with a tense shoulder. Thane's hand only let go of mine, once the room had emptied. Chapter 2. The Arrangement. "Where to?" the driver asked through the rear view. Thane looked at me, waiting. "Somewhere," I said. "Where I can think. Ashford Tower. Executive floor." The driver answered, muffled, and the car slid toward Midtown. I rested my temple against the window. I caught the reflection of my mouth against the facade of a jewelry store, lipstick intact. I didn't know how. "You're not shaking," he said. "I know. Why not?" "Because I already shook out everything I had to shake 6 months ago. What's left is the decision." He looked at me for a stretch of time I didn't measure. "Tell me at the office," he said finally. "The driver listens here." Ashford Tower, in Midtown, had 48 floors and a white marble entrance that, at that hour of the night, was deserted. The doorman, in a dark uniform, stood up when Thane walked in and held the door without saying, "Good evening." We crossed the lobby in silence. The executive elevator opened with his fingerprint pressed to the panel. It rose to the 46th floor without stopping. The door to the executive floor opened onto an oak reception area in low light, with the secretary's chair empty and the screen on the standby panel dark. There was no one. Phelan, the in-house counsel of the conglomerate I knew to be the man closest to him, must have left hours earlier. He guided me down the hallway with his hand half an inch from my back, not touching. He pushed open a double door with a soft press. He turned on only the corner lamp and the desk light, leaving the ceiling in shadow. It was a large room, a whole window onto a lit-up Manhattan. Dark wood desk, 2 low armchairs facing a small coffee table, a bar cart with 5 bottles and 4 crystal glasses. "Whiskey? Wine, if you have it." He did. He poured 2 glasses and handed me one without touching my fingers. He sat down in the armchair across from mine, rested his elbows on his knees, didn't cross his legs, didn't lean back. "Talk," he said. I breathed, looked at the liquid in the glass, looked at him, thought about the 3 sentences I had rehearsed in my head in the car. "Eve Pemberton dated me for 2 years. I began, in the lowest voice I had. 6 months ago, I came back early from a trip and found him in bed with my sister, Cordelia. A month ago, he announced publicly that he's marrying her. The wedding is in April." He didn't interrupt, didn't make a sympathy face. He just listened, with the same focused attention I had seen, in newspaper photos, when he listened to financial advisors. "Tonight," I went on, he stood up from his table to whisper in my ear that he's going to marry her. He thought I was going to cry. I didn't cry. I looked to the side and saw you. Thane took half a sip of his whiskey, set the glass on the coffee table. "And you said you were with me." I did. "Why?" "Because it's the only thing in the world he envies." He didn't confirm, didn't deny, but I saw the corner of his mouth move a millimeter. It wasn't a smile. It was recognition. It was the face of a man who knew exactly what I was talking about, who knew about the merger 3 years earlier, who knew about the position Eve had lost at his firm after that defeat, who knew that the name Ashford was the only name in Manhattan that Eve couldn't hear without biting his lip. "And what do you want from me now?" he asked. I set the glass down on the coffee table, straightened my back. 6 months, I said, "from now until after his wedding. Coordinated appearances, public dinners, calculated photos. You're my fiancé in the press. I'm yours wherever needed. In return, Holloway Events organizes, free of charge, every year-end event for Ashford Holdings, including the December charity gala." He looked at me in silence. I held his gaze. "The gala is worth millions in public image," I went on. "I know what I'm offering. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a name." He stayed silent for a full minute. I counted, out of habit, not calculation. I coordinated events with a mental stopwatch always running. At the end of the minute, he looked at me. "Why me?" he asked. "I already told you. You told me because he envies him. That's half. The other half is why, of all the men in Manhattan he envies, you chose the man you said no to a year ago." I blinked. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even inflected the sentence. He had simply stated it the same way he'd ordered the whiskey from the waiter at La Signa, but the sentence caught me the way a thin branch catches the side of your arm when you're moving fast through the woods. "I didn't say no to you," I answered slowly. "I said I didn't mix work with that. That's the polite version of no." "It is. Still a no." I picked up the glass again, took a sip. The wine was at the exact right temperature. "I chose you," I said, "because I'm an event planner, not a strategist, and I work with what I have on the table. You were on the table. Eve was in the room. You're the worst possible news for him." He nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I accept," he said. I didn't show the breath I held back. "With one condition." "Tell me." He set the glass down, leaned forward a little more. His eyes were locked on mine, not drifting to the rest of my face. "You don't just use me for this," he said. "When you need something during these 6 months, you say it. You don't pretend. You don't treat me like a backdrop. If Eve corners you again in some hallway, you call me. If your sister shows up at your door, you call me. If you want to stop before April, you tell me before it shows up in a society column. Deal?" I hadn't expected that. The condition didn't make sense. He was the one giving me $1 billion name. I was the one handing over work for free. The trade tilted entirely in my favor. The logical condition would have been for him to demand an exclusivity clause, a breach penalty, image control, not call me. Deal, I answered, before I let myself think too much. He nodded once more, picked up the phone from the desk, typed 3 short sentences, and set it back down on the wood. I just told Phelan. He's still in the building 2 floors down. He'll come up in a minute to meet you. Phelan? My lawyer. He'll draft the contract tomorrow at 9. Do you have your own lawyer? I do. Send his name to his secretary. Phelan will send the draft. You read it, adjust it, sign Friday. Until then, no society columns, no appearances, nothing about that scene at La Signa tonight. Henri saw everything, I said. The whole room saw. Henri's worked for the house 20 years. The house has worked with me for 12. He won't talk. Thane set the glass down. The others, I'll handle. There are 3 columnists who owe me old favors. By Friday, no one will publish anything I don't want published. The rumors will move regardless, but I prefer the first photo to be mine. Agreed. He stood up, walked to the window. With his back to me, his left hand in his pants pocket, he looked out at the lit-up Manhattan. Marin, he said, without turning. It was the first time he'd said my name since we'd left the restaurant. I had forgotten he knew it. Yes. Why did you say no to me last year? I thought about lying. I thought about saying, because you were a client. It was the easy truth. The truth that fit into 3 words at the elevator door. But the man at the window had just given me 6 months of public protection for the price of call me, and I owed him a whole answer. Because I was still with Eve, I answered. And you were the most beautiful thing that had walked into my line of sight. I didn't know how to trust myself. He didn't turn. He stood there another 5 seconds, his silhouette cut against the tall window, left hand in his pocket, right hand with fingers spread along his thigh, not holding the whiskey he had left on the coffee table. Thank you, he said quietly, and only then did he turn. I'll call you a car, he announced, in the professional tone again. Phelan will be in touch tomorrow. Don't drive yourself home. The driver takes you to the door of your building, not the curb. Okay? I stood up, picked up my coat, which I had set on the arm of the chair when we came in. When I turned to leave, I saw his desk from another angle, and from that angle, I saw the book. It lay open, spine down, on a small stack of folders, dark blue cover, white letters, a name I recognized before I even read it carefully. Mary Oliver. Devotions. The open page had a corner folded down, a habit I had with every book on my shelf, and that people had always called me a barbarian for. I didn't comment. I just filed it away. I tucked the detail into the compartment behind my left rib, where I kept all the things that didn't fit into a spreadsheet but might come in handy later. The man the world knew, head of a conglomerate that ran hotels on 3 continents, read American poetry at 11:45 at night in an empty office. Good night, I said. Good night, Marin. Phelan appeared at the end of the hallway before I reached the elevator, exactly as Thane had said. He was a tall, lean man with discreet glasses and a gray overcoat folded over his arm. He must have been leaving his floor when he got the message and had come up just to introduce himself. I'd seen his photo in the signature of 3 or 4 corporate emails over the past year. Miss Holloway, he said, and his voice carried the kind of very faint irony you develop after years in court. I've just been summoned to draft a non-marital, premarital contract. A pleasure. I laughed. It was the first laugh of my night, and it came from somewhere deep, and it caught me by surprise. I'll send you my lawyer's name in the morning, I answered. Please. I have a personal curiosity about the professional who's going to sign off on this draft. He pressed the elevator button for me. The doors opened immediately. I looked back, down the hallway that led to the office, and I saw Thane standing in the doorway, half a meter from us, his right hand still in his pants pocket, and his left resting on the doorframe. He didn't say anything else. He just tipped his head half an inch as the elevator closed. In the car back, I pressed my temple to the window and watched Park Avenue unspooling backward, toward Tribeca. One sentence kept turning in my head. When you need something, you say it. You don't pretend. It wasn't a clause. It wasn't good for him. It was a 5-word open door in a wall I hadn't asked anyone to take down. The driver pulled up in front of my building in Tribeca at 12:15. Good night, Miss Holloway. Mr. Ashford asked me to let you know the car will be available tomorrow if you need it. Thank you. In the apartment, I went to the mirror in the foyer. The woman who looked back had her hair intact, her lipstick intact, her coat intact, but she had the memory of a man's hand on the back of her right hand, and she knew, without knowing why she knew, that the hand was going to come back. For the first time in 6 months, I didn't think about Eve before I fell asleep. Chapter 3. First Flash. 11 days after La Signa, Ren showed up at my Tribeca apartment at 7:30 in the evening, makeup case balanced on her hip, and the face of someone who'd come for a war, not a party. She dropped everything on the side table in the living room, looked me up and down with that clinical air she puts on when she's pretending to be annoyed, and pointed at the chair in front of the mirror. Sit, and don't talk. I'm doing the talking for both of us tonight. Ren Calloway has been my best friend since we were 19, and she's the only person in the world who knows exactly where the line is between cheering me up and pushing me. 5 years ago, when I built Holloway Events from nothing in a leaky loft in Tribeca, she walked away from a respectable job at a big agency to be my silent partner. She says she does it out of friendship. I know she does it out of stubbornness. You're pale, she pronounced, opening the case. But pale on purpose or pale from fear? On purpose. Liar. She started with concealer, in silence. Does he treat you well? Ren asked in a low voice. Too soon to tell. Professional is the floor, not the ceiling. She stepped back, studied the result, came back in. Listen to me. If at any point, in front of anyone he treats you badly, I'll kill him. Personally. I'm not talking metaphor. I'm talking premeditated, with an alibi. I laughed without meaning to. It was the first time I'd laughed all day. You're a terrible silent partner. I'm silent in meetings. In an apartment, I'm something else. 40 minutes later, I was ready. Hair down, dark lipstick, the slit of the dress at the right height. Ren pushed me toward the door, kissed my cheek without leaving lipstick, and said, "Remember, you're not asking for anything. He's the lucky one." I left, went down, got in the car Holloway Events had rented in my name, because I'd decided on the night of the agreement that I wouldn't show up anywhere in his car. It was a rule of mine. Small, but mine. The gallery was in Chelsea, a long exposed brick space I knew from a cocktail event 2 years before. That night, the sidewalk was cordoned off with velvet ropes and 2 rows of photographers leaning against the lampposts. The opening of a new artist who sold her whole body of work before she even hung it. The right guests, the right press. Thane was waiting at the entrance. Dark suit, no tie, standing, no phone in his hands. He saw me before I saw him, and held my gaze while I crossed the last few yards of curb between us. He didn't smile. He held out his arm. "Ready?" "No," I answered, "but I'm going in anyway." He fit my hand into the crook of his forearm, a contained gesture, rehearsed and natural at the same time, and we crossed the rope. The first flash came before the second step. After the second, 12 more came in quick succession, that white burst that blinded me for a moment and made my breath catch in the middle of my chest. I felt the warmth of his arm climb up my hand, through the sleeve of my coat, settle on my shoulder. It wasn't rhetoric. It was a gesture. "I'm here. Breathe. Slowly," he said, quietly, not moving his lips for the camera. They give up in 20 seconds. They gave up in 15. The gallery door closed behind us, and the room swallowed me whole. High ceiling, industrial chandelier, big, saturated red canvases, the smell of champagne slowly going stale in the glasses. I recognized 3 former clients in the right corner. I waved discreetly. "Wait," Thane said. "Before I introduce you to anyone, I want to introduce you to one person." Before I could ask, a tall, thin man, tortoiseshell glasses, and the smile of someone who lives at parties, crossed the room toward us with 2 glasses of champagne balanced between his fingers. "So you're the one," he said, before he even introduced himself, and handed me one of the glasses. "You're the one who pulled off the impossible." I took the glass by the stem, looked at Thane. "Arlo Devereaux," Thane said, the way you'd announce an obstacle. "Co-host at some of my dinners, knows everyone, talks to everyone, believes half of it. A third," Arlo corrected, pleased with himself. "The other half is pity." He turned to me. "And you, Holloway, is this true or is it business?" I opened my mouth to answer. Thane answered first. "She pulled it off. I just said yes." It was a sentence of 7 words. He said it with the calm of a man signing a contract. He didn't look at me, didn't squeeze my hand. He just said it, and the sentence settled in the air between the 3 of us like a small stone he'd taken out of his pocket and put back in the right place. I felt the sentence in my chest, tried not to feel it, failed. "Charming," Arlo said, raising his glass. "Terribly charming. I'll be carrying this one to all 4 corners of the room." And off he went, satisfied. Thane finally looked at me. "Was that too much?" "It was enough," I answered. He understood. He didn't push. We walked among the pieces. He pointed at a red canvas and said quietly that the artist had been a client of his firm for 2 years. He rested his hand on my waist for 3 seconds, maybe 4, when a woman in pearls stepped a little too close and pulled it away the moment she turned her back. In the 4th room, near a bronze sculpture whose base I recognized from a catalog, the temperature of the room shifted. The smell warned me first. That bass note of cedar and tobacco I knew by heart, the cologne I had bought Eve the Christmas of 2 years ago, and that he'd kept wearing after I moved out. The smell got there before they did. Cordelia came from the left. Eve from the right. Choreographed move. "Marin," Cordelia said, with that sweet smile she'd been practicing in the mirror since she was 9. "What a coincidence." "It's not," I answered. "You knew I'd be here." She pretended not to hear. She tilted her head toward Thane, with that little sister chin tuck, and held out her hand. "Cordelia Holloway, the sister. I know who you are," Thane said. The line came out without sharpness, without sweetness. It came out as information. Cordelia's hand hung in the air for half a second before it dropped. Eve's held out his. Thane shook it. It was the most polite handshake in the world, but the kind of politeness that makes a man understand he's at a disadvantage before a single word. "Pemberton," Thane greeted. "Hadn't seen you in person in 3 years. Not since the Viridian Group merger." Eve froze. It was a short, subtle freeze. The kind most people in the room wouldn't have caught, but I caught it. I saw the color drop from his face from the top down, neck first, then jaw, then cheeks. He smiled out of reflex, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Right," Eve answered, careful not to let his voice trip. "Different times." "Times," Thane agreed. And that was it. No explicit jab, no sharp comment. Just the name of a 3-year-old merger said in a neutral voice inside an upscale gallery, and Eve shock pale in front of me. Cordelia touched his elbow, small, with a fiancé's gesture. "Let's grab champagne," she said. "Pleasure to meet you, Marin." "It wasn't," I answered. She pretended to laugh. They left. I kept my eyes on Thane until I was sure my hands weren't shaking. "You're shaking," he said quietly, without turning his head. "Breathe." I breathed. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. For the first time that night, maybe for the first time in months, someone was actually next to me, and the feeling hit my stomach before my head, and I pretended it didn't. We stayed another 40 minutes. I greeted 6 people. He introduced me to 4 others. At some point, near the exit, I realized he was watching me while I laughed at a joke from an older curator. He didn't look away when I turned. He just blinked once, slowly, and said, "You laugh differently when it isn't business." "How so?" "Louder. Lower in your chest." I didn't know what to answer. He wasn't waiting for one anyway. At 1:45, he walked me to the back door of the gallery, where Wren had parked the rented driver discreetly. Before I got into the car, he held the door open with his hand and said, "Wednesday, the 13th, I have the gala timeline meeting. Can you come yourself?" "I can." "Good." And he closed the door. Wren was already inside the car, an iced coffee in her hand, and the face of someone who'd been waiting for me for hours in a parking lot, even though she'd shown up 10 minutes earlier. She waited for the car to turn the corner, waited for me to breathe. Then she spoke. "Tell me everything. From the start." I told her, in a low voice, in order, like I was filing a report. Arlo's line, Thane's answer, Eve's cologne before Eve, the Viridian Group merger, Cordelia's chin, the hand on my waist for 3 seconds, the line about laughing lower in my chest. Wren listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she stayed quiet for a while, watching the Hudson through the window. "Marin," she said finally, "I have to tell you something." "Tell me." "Mercer Group called me yesterday, offered me director of operations. Salary practically double what I take from Holloway. Their whole client portfolio. Company car." I felt my breath drop. "Wren." I said no. She said it with her back to me, not turning, chin propped on her fist. "Said it the way you comment on the weather. You're insane." "I don't leave you, not even for real money," she answered. "I told you that already. I figured you'd kept it." "I kept it." "Then don't make me say it twice." I looked outside too. Manhattan went past the windows in fragments of yellow light, the fronts of buildings under construction, faded musical posters, steam curling up from manhole covers. The city I had chosen at 22, alone, without anyone's permission. The city I had chosen at 22, alone, without anyone's permission. I thought about Thane's line. She pulled it off. I just said yes. It was for the audience. It was meant for the audience. There was no reason for it to mean anything more than that. And still, from the stomach up, something had moved inside me when he said it, and Wren, on the other side of the back seat, had spotted it in 3 sentences. "Marin, you're smiling." "I'm not." "Yes, you are." I put my hand to my mouth on reflex. Confirmed. "Damn it," I said. "Damn it indeed," Wren agreed, satisfied, taking a sip of her iced coffee. And the car turned onto 7th Avenue toward Tribeca, and somewhere behind me, in the gallery, Eve was probably trying to explain to Cordelia why the name Ashford had drained the color from his face, and I was supposed to be thinking about anything but the way Thane had said I laugh lower in my chest. I wasn't. Chapter 4. Storm. On Wednesday, November 13th, the morning forecast promised heavy rain by late afternoon. I read it on my phone over coffee and decided it didn't matter. The meeting was at 6 in the evening, inside a granite high-rise, and I'd be driving from the office straight into the underground garage of Ashford Tower. A November rain doesn't change a grown woman's schedule. I got to the tower lobby at 5:50. The receptionist recognized me without ID and waved me through to the executive elevator. Thane's executive office took up the 46th floor, with his suite and Phelan's anteroom on the same level. The meeting was set for the scheduling room, 2 floors below, where I'd marked up every front of the charity gala in green pen the week before. I always mark pending decisions in green. Phelan greeted me in the hallway. Phelan Marsh, chief counsel of Ashford Holdings for the past 8 years, was the kind of man you didn't notice the first time and couldn't forget afterward. 36, tall, fine-rimmed glasses, a one-line smile. He'd drafted the contract for my fake engagement in one morning without asking a single question more than he had to. Holloway, he shook my hand without too much grip. He came down straight from his office. He asked me to tell you he'll be 5 minutes late. He's wrapping up a call with Singapore. That's fine. There's fresh coffee on the table. I pulled your preference from last time. No milk, 2 sugars. I smiled. He really had remembered. He left without explaining how. I sat down at the table, opened my notebook, started reviewing the latest changes to the timeline on my own, green pen at the corner of my mouth. Outside, on the other side of the 44th floor window, Manhattan was already starting to dim. The clouds had closed in while I was in the elevator. I hadn't noticed. Thane arrived at 6:10, white shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, no jacket, phone still in hand. Sorry, no problem. 5 minutes. Singapore takes a while. I imagine. He sat down at the head of the table, set the phone face down, opened his notebook with the air of a man who'd decided that morning not to be distracted by anything. It took us half an hour to go through the timeline. In 40 minutes, we closed the vendor list. In an hour, I had handed over every pending document. He had approved everyone, and Phelan had gone home. And that's when the storm came in. I didn't see it come. I heard it. A low thunderclap first, the kind that makes the glass vibrate before the rain falls. Then the rain came, in a white curtain that erased the rest of the city on the other side of the window. Within 3 minutes, the headlights of the cabs below turned into blurred red points. Within 5, the wind began to slam into the facade with audible force. Thane lifted his eyes from the notebook. That wasn't in the forecast. It was, just not at this size. He picked up the phone, called someone with a single sentence, listened for 20 seconds, hung up. Avenues closed from 42nd to 59th. Regular elevators are locked down for safety. The executive's still running, but the basement garage is flooding. Your driver isn't going to make it for another hour, maybe more. I looked at the clock on the corner of my notebook. 7:40. I can wait. You can. He closed his notebook. You haven't had dinner. No, neither have I. That's how we ended up in his office, 2 floors up, with an open bottle of red wine on the desk and 2 plates of cold pasta sent up by the building's kitchen. On white porcelain plates I'd never imagined existed inside a corporate high-rise. The office was as I remembered it from the night of the agreement, almost 4 weeks earlier. A whole wall of window onto Central Park, now blacked out by the rain, a leather sofa along the side, bookshelves of carefully chosen books, the huge dark wood desk. The poetry book wasn't open anymore. It had been put back on one of the shelves, spine facing out. I noticed, and pretended I hadn't. You don't talk much about Holloway events, he said, after the second sip of wine. He was sitting on the sofa, sideways, one foot resting on the ankle of the other. When you do, you talk about it like it belongs to someone else. It's a habit. Why? I thought about giving him the press answer, the polished line about how it started in a leaky loft and grew through word of mouth from satisfied clients. I looked at the window. The rain was roaring against the glass. I thought about Ren in the car saying I don't leave you, not even for real money, and gave up rehearsing. I grew up being the responsible one. I started. I was 7 when my sister was born. She got the bigger bedroom because she was new and needed room to grow. I got the smaller one. At 11, I washed dishes 3 times a week because she had ballet. At 15, I worked at the neighborhood bakery after school to buy my own books. At 22, I left. At 23, I built the company in a loft that smelled like old paint. I don't talk proudly about the company because deep down, it's the most intimate thing I have. People laugh at intimate things if you say them too loud. He listened to all of it without interrupting, without looking at me either. He looked at the window. I thanked him without saying anything. My father died 5 years ago, he said, after a reasonable silence. Calloway Ashford, you might know the name. He built half the hotel industry on the East Coast out of one house in Boston. He was a numbers man, believed affection softened heirs. When I brought home good grades, he said, very good. When I closed a deal, he said, very good. When I graduated from Stanford with honors, he said, "Very good," and that was the only thing he ever said to me. He died without ever saying he loved me, without saying he was proud, without saying one word more. The sentence landed in the office like a heavy stone. He said it looking at his wine, the glass turning slowly between his fingers. "I'm sorry," I said. "Me too." Silence. The rain. A more distant clap of thunder, again. The lights flickered for a moment, came back, flickered again. That's when the power went out. It went out for 2 seconds, maybe 3. I heard the building's generator hiss somewhere behind the walls, the mechanical sound of a system that knew what to do and was doing it. But, for those 2 seconds, we were in complete darkness on the 46th floor, with the storm hissing on the other side of the glass, and the warmth of our breathing the only concrete thing between us. I don't know who moved first. I know I had leaned forward, and that he had leaned forward, and that my hand, resting on the arm of the sofa, was half an inch from his without touching. I know I caught his scent up close for the first time, and that it was the smell of skin washed with neutral soap, no cologne, with some faint trace of vetiver in the jacket hanging behind me. I know my mouth opened half a second to speak, and didn't. The light came back, in a yellow ripple first, then white, then steady. I started breathing again. He pulled back half an inch. I pulled back half an inch. The difference had been so small, so exactly the size of a folded finger, that if I said it out loud, it would sound ridiculous. "More wine?" he asked. "No." "Coffee?" "Coffee." He stood up, went over to a small machine in the corner of the bookshelf, one of those professional ones that pulls espresso in 40 seconds. I stayed watching his back, the white shirt, the sleeves rolled to the forearms, and tried to think about anything that wasn't those 2 seconds. I thought about piano. "Where did you learn?" I asked, out loud before I thought. "Learn what?" "Poetry." I pointed at the bookshelf behind him, where the spine of the Mary Oliver was still turned outward. "I saw the book the night we signed the agreement. That wasn't business reading." He stopped with the cup in his hand, turned. He didn't pretend he hadn't understood. "My mother read. Before my father. Before the marriage, she read a lot. Played piano, too. Schubert. Chopin. Brahms." "Brahms?" I repeated. "Why?" "The Berceuse. It was the first piece I learned all the way through, when I was 9. My grandmother taught me." He looked at me for a long stretch. Then, without saying anything, he walked across the office, sat down on the bench of an upright piano against the wall I hadn't noticed between the bookshelves, lifted the lid, and played the first 8 bars of Brahms's Berceuse. The first thing I thought was that he played well. The second was that he played with the weight of the specific kind of person who learned young and never really put it down. The third was that I was laughing, silently, hand over my mouth, at the absurdity of listening to Brahms on the 46th floor of a Park Avenue high-rise during a November storm, with a man half the Manhattan press considered impossible. He stopped at the 9th bar, turned. "That laugh," he said. "That's the one I wanted to hear. You're a piece of work, Ashford." "I am." The rain started easing up, slowly, after 10. Phelan called at 11. He said the building's garage had been drained, that a reinforced car could take me home safely. Thane answered, thanked him, hung up. "You're coming down with me to the garage," he said. "Not up for discussion. I'm not arguing." "Good." We went down. The executive elevator took 40-some floors in silence. I was leaning against the wall opposite him. He was looking at the panel. The air between us had that dense quality of a space where someone had been too close without touching, and I thought about saying something, and let it go. In the garage, the car was waiting. Driver in uniform. Tinted windows. Thane opened the back door for me, held the top of it, and offered me his hand to step down from the high threshold to the seat. I put my hand in his. It was a touch that shouldn't have lasted at all. It was a touch that should have been just enough time for me to lean my weight and step in, and for him to let go. He let go half a second after the time. I felt the half second. He felt that I had felt it. Neither of us said anything. "Good night, Marin," he said then. "Good night, Thane." It was the first time I'd called him by his first name out loud. He closed the door. The car pulled away. I looked at my hand, closed in my lap, and pretended it wasn't warm. At home, I lay down on the bed without changing. Ren sent me 3 texts asking if everything was okay. I answered yes. It was 1:45. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, and Manhattan had that smell of wet asphalt the city only has between the end of a storm and the first morning after. I tried to sleep. I didn't. I thought about the Berceuse. I thought about the office in the dark. I thought about the very good that had never become anything else. I thought about the half second too long, and gave up pretending it was anything else. I fell asleep without his name appearing once. Chapter 5. Plaza. The Saturday of the gala fell on the 3rd weekend of December. I got to the plaza at 9 in the morning with the clipboard tucked under my arm and 2 coffees in my hand, one for me and one for Ren, who was already kneeling on the carpet of the main ballroom counting napkins for the third time. The central chandelier hung over the head table like a heavy jewel, and the cold December light came down at an angle through the tall windows, hitting the forest green velvet of the chairs. The room smelled of furniture wax, white lilies, and a distant bass note of bread baking in the hotel kitchen. The card holders came in wrong, Ren said without looking up. They came in silver. We ordered brushed gold. How many? 300. I took a deep breath, bit the inside of my cheek, and opened the vendor app. I'll fix it in 40 minutes. Can you handle the seating chart for me? On it. She finally looked up at me, from below, red hair in a messy bun. Did you sleep? No. Did you eat? Half a croissant. Maren. I know. I knew. But it was the Ashford Holdings Charity Gala, the event that was going to fund the entire foundation for the following year, and I had promised Thane a surgical night. It wasn't the time to think about my own stomach. I called the vendor while I walked between the tables, counting place settings, nudging silverware half a millimeter to the left, asking the floor manager to rethink the position of the floral screen blocking the view of the stage. Phelan showed up before noon, in a charcoal suit, glasses pushed up on his head, and handed me an envelope with the updated security plan. I noticed he had learned to hand me things without expecting a thank you. Sterling Vance is on the list, he said, neutral. I looked up. Sterling was one of the minority partners in the hospitality division, a man in his early 40s, thin in a way that reminded you of rulers, with a laugh that leaked under doors. I'd met him in a brief meeting at Ashford Tower weeks earlier, and he'd called me the girl 3 times in the same sentence. At his insistence? I asked. By right of position. Phelan adjusted the glasses. Thane knows. Good. Mrs. Ashford also confirmed. It took me a second to realize he was warning me, not informing me. Vesper. I swallowed dry, thanked him, and went back to the card holders. At 1 in the afternoon, the correct card holders arrived in 2 large cardboard boxes, and Ren and I swapped them out one by one, like jewelers, while the string quartet tuned at the back of the room. At 5, I went up to the room reserved for me at the hotel, took a cold shower, put on the long-sleeved forest green dress Ren had picked out. If you're going to match anything in that ballroom, match the chair, not the flower. Pinned my hair into a low bun, put on the pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, and came down the service stairs. Thane was in the hallway before the ballroom, in a black tuxedo, alone, a glass of water in his hand. He looked me over once, slowly, top to bottom, and then settled on my face. You haven't eaten, he said. How do you know? You hold your jaw a certain way when you haven't eaten. I blinked. He held the glass of water out to me. I took it, drank half. Thanks. Maren. He waited until I was looking at him fully. Tonight, anything happens, you call me. I know. That's not a courtesy line. I know. He gave a tiny nod, offered his arm, and we walked through the doors of the main ballroom together. The first guests were already in the lounge. The sound of the quartet rose between the glasses, and the waiters were circulating with trays of champagne. I greeted 3 couples who knew Holloway events from other events, exchanged air kisses, laughed at the right joke at the right time. I caught Cordelia entering the room out of the corner of my eye, in a navy blue dress, alone, with a rehearsed smile, and looked away in time. Eve wasn't with her. That should have relieved me, and instead it put me on alert. Vesper Ashford appeared in the room at 8:30, exactly as dinner was beginning to be served. She was 60 years old, and had the posture of a woman who had spent 40 of them being photographed at galas. Gray hair pinned low, plain black dress without shine, a single thin diamond choker. She crossed the room without greeting anyone in passing, stopped beside me, and touched my arm with 2 fingers, lightly, the way you check whether a piece of clothing is good quality. Maren, dear, Mrs. Ashford. Vesper, please. We'll look ridiculous if you call me ma'am all night. Vesper. She tilted her head half an inch, and dropped her voice to a tone only I could hear, a tone of refined politeness that cut like a razor wrapped in silk. I trust you understand that the Ashford name is not on the table here tonight. She was smiling with her mouth, not her eyes. My son's businesses are quite visible. His choices, too. It's natural that some choices have less staying power than others. I felt the ballroom shrink around me for 2 seconds. I heard Ren laughing at something 3 tables away, heard a fork clinking against porcelain, heard the first note of the quartet's next piece. I held her gaze and breathed through my back. I don't need the Ashford name, Vesper. My voice came out steady, low, effortless. I need her son, and he chose me. She stopped smiling, not out of anger, out of recalibration, like a woman who realizes mid-game that the other player also knows the rules. She tilted her head again, this time for real, and walked away in silence to the head table. Ren appeared at my elbow the next second, in a wine-red dress, holding a champagne flute. I saw it from across the room. What did she say? Later. Did you handle it? Yes. Drink. I drank. Cordelia approached the moment dinner began. She had the rehearsal of a fragile person running down from her eyes to her mouth and held out her arms as if we were going to embrace. Maren, I was waiting for a chance to... I stepped back half a step. No. Please, I just wanted... Cordelia, no. My voice didn't rise. The ballroom kept up its murmur. She stopped with her arms half raised, redirected into a wave at the air, and found a sudden reason to look for her own seat at the table. I saw Vesper watching from the other side of the ballroom, a glass in her hand, and realized for the first time that she had been the one to invite my sister. I didn't comment. I sat at the head table next to Thane, with Wren on my left. Phelan was 3 seats down, beside the Foundation's director. Sterling Vance was on the opposite side of the same table, beside 2 minority partners from the tech division, and he drank his first whiskey before the first course arrived. I heard Sterling's first joke in the middle of the second course. He talked loud, in the way of a man who confuses volume with humor, and the line reached my ear over his arm, leaning toward the other partners. The girl organized the dinner and took the host home. Efficiency, you have to admit. She's a professional from start to finish. The 2 partners laughed with that complicit shyness people use when laughing out of social obligation. I set the fork down. I didn't get up. I kept chewing what was in my mouth, slowly, and looked at Thane, only for the length of a blink. He was already looking at Sterling, his jaw locked in a way I had learned to recognize. It was a minimal movement, almost invisible, that traveled from his temple to the base of his neck in half a second. He set his napkin down, stood up. Phelan, low voice, professional. With me. Sterling, with me too. Service room off the ballroom. Now. Sterling opened his mouth to complain, looked at Thane's face, closed his mouth, stood up. The 3 of them left the ballroom through the side door in a line. Wren looked at me with wide eyes. Is he going to... He's going to. Here? Now? Now. 20 minutes. I counted by the courses served. When Thane came back to the ballroom, he came back alone. Phelan came through the door 2 minutes later, adjusting his tie. Sterling didn't come back. Thane sat down beside me, opened the napkin in his lap, picked up his glass, and looked at me from the side. Fired, he said, without turning his head, in front of 2 witnesses besides Phelan. He's out of the building tomorrow morning. You did that here. I did. Over a joke. For you. I looked at my plate. For the first time in 6 months, I felt my whole body warm from the inside out, from the base of my sternum outward, and pretended it was the wine. It wasn't. The night followed the script I had drawn up 3 weeks earlier. The Foundation director's speech, the institutional video, the silent auction, the announcement of the total raised. In the middle of the auction, a small hand tugged at my sleeve. It was a girl, around 14, in a pale blue dress, hair in a braid, Foundation badge at her chest. She looked up at me, red with courage. You're the organizer. I am. You left a card in the envelope with the program. I did. I want to do this when I grow up. I looked at her with more attention than I'd given anyone in the ballroom that night. What's your name? Birdie. Birdie Halloran. Birdie. I repeated it slowly. I'll remember. She smiled the kind of smile children give when they don't expect to be heard, and she walked off down the side aisle. I jotted her name in the corner of my inside clipboard without realizing I was doing it. It was the kind of name that comes back later. I didn't know how yet, but it would. Around 10:30, I had to step out of the ballroom to check the stage for the closing performance. I went through the service hallway, turned right at the end, walked into the women's restroom on that floor, a room with 3 marble basins, mirrors that ran from floor to ceiling, and yellow light. I washed my hands, touched my bun to check the pins. The ballroom outside was a murmur muffled by the door. The door opened. In the mirror, I saw Eve walk in. He shut the door behind him with his shoulder. No hurry, no brutality. With that horrible certainty men have when they know exactly where they're stepping. This is the women's room, I said, through the mirror. I know. I turned around, pressed my back against the basin. Get out. 2 minutes, Maren. Get out. He stepped 3 paces closer, stopped a meter from me, smiled the smile I had known in bed, a smile I could no longer separate from rumpled sheets and her perfume on my pillowcase. You're pretending. Low voice, like a caress. I know you. This man isn't your type, Maren. He's using you to get under that merger. You're using me to get to Cordelia. Let's stop playing. Get out. You still love me. The palm of my hand met his chest before my head registered the movement. I shoved him, not with the force of a fight, with the force of a choice. He stumbled back half a step, surprised, and opened up enough space for me to pass. I left, slammed the bathroom door behind me with more noise than I needed to. Thane was at the end of the hallway, on his feet, back to the wall, like a man who had gotten there 3 minutes earlier and was waiting. His eyes crossed my face and read everything I wasn't going to say. Where is he? It wasn't a question. It was a conjugation. I gripped his arm with both hands. Squeezed. No. Take me home. Marin, take me home. Please. He looked at the bathroom door. Looked at me. His breathing settled in 3 seconds like a wave that decides not to break. He took my hand, locked it into the crook of his elbow, and walked me through the service hallway, down the side stairs, out the back door of the hotel that opened onto 58th Street. His driver was on the other side of the street. Thane gave a tiny signal. The car came in silence. I got in. He got in. The driver took 5th Avenue, turned south, and started up Park Avenue toward the Upper East Side. I looked out the window for 2 minutes. The signs of the storefronts painted orange stripes on my green dress. Thane pulled the car over at 67th. The driver understood, got out, closed the door behind him, and walked off toward the corner, hands in his pockets. Thane turned his body toward me. He didn't touch me. His voice came out hoarse in a way I had never heard from him. Marin. He waited for me to look at him. I'm not going to kiss you to fake anything. I'm going to kiss you because I can't not kiss you anymore. I didn't answer. I tilted my face 1/2 inch. It was enough. His mouth found mine slowly, unhurried, no invasion, with a controlled hunger underneath that I felt in his jaw before I felt it on his lips. His hand rose to the back of my neck, slowly, and stayed there with weight. The other hand stayed open on the velvet of the seat, near my waist, not touching. He was asking with his mouth what I couldn't ask with words. I answered by tilting my head. The kiss deepened. I tasted whiskey, mint, and his warmth came through the long sleeve of my dress at the shoulder where his hand finally settled. It was a long kiss, not fast, not desperate. It was the kind of kiss 2 adults give each other when they've already decided, without saying it to each other, that they're not going back. We pulled apart by 1 inch. Our foreheads touched. He breathed against my lips. You know this wasn't supposed to happen, I whispered. I know, you know, I know. He opened his eyes. And it happened. I kept looking at him for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. The driver came back walking slowly along the sidewalk, pretending to check his phone. Thane straightened his jacket, tucked a strand of my hair back into the bun, and tapped the divider glass twice. The car moved. We went back to the penthouse in silence, without agreeing to. I didn't go up with him. He didn't ask. He got out first, opened the door on my side, helped me out, raised my hand to his mouth, kissed my fingers for 2 seconds without performance, and said 1 sentence before I got into the hotel car the doorman had called. I'll call you tomorrow, day after we talk. All right. I sat in the back seat of the black sedan. The doorman closed the door. I looked through the window and saw Thane standing on the curb, hands in the pockets of his tuxedo, watching me go. He only turned to go inside the building once the car had passed the corner. I got home, in Tribeca, at 1:30 in the morning. I took the pins out of my hair one by one over the sink, hung the green dress on the hanger, took a long bath, lay down, turned off the light. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark thinking about the line he had said in the car, and his mouth, and his hand on the back of my neck, and the way Vesper had tilted her head when she realized I knew how to play, and Sterling leaving the plaza without coming back, and Eve in the bathroom mirror with that smile, and my hand pushing his chest as if I had rehearsed the move my entire life. I thought about Bertie Halloran. I thought about Wren saying you handled it. I thought about Thane saying for you. Around 3 in the morning, I realized, without meaning to, that the fake engagement had ended at some point during that night, and that neither of us yet knew when. I rolled over in bed. The sheets smelled like soap. I felt the spot on my chest where he had kissed my hand, and closed my eyes with the strange certainty that I was going to have to decide, soon, whether what had begun as revenge was going to continue as truth. I fell asleep, thinking it was still only Saturday, and that on Monday, I was going to have to look at him in a meeting room, as if my mouth no longer knew his. Chapter 6. Hamptons. Almost 4 weeks after the plaza, on the second Friday of January, Thane showed up at the door of my Tribeca loft at 10 in the morning with the keys to the car in his hand and a dark leather jacket I had never seen. No tie, no suit. Not the man the ballroom knew. 3 days, he said, leaning against the doorframe. No work, no press. Hamptons. I have a client Monday at 9. I'll have you back Sunday at 8. I hesitated, not because of the client, because of the sense that going to the Hamptons with him was signing something I'd been pretending I hadn't already signed, even after 3 weeks in which we had had dinner 3 times, talked on the phone every night, and kissed 2 more times without either of us calling it a relationship out loud. 5 minutes. I'll grab a bag. You have a bag? I do. For 2 weeks now. He laughed through his nose, quietly. It was the second real laugh I'd heard out of him. The drive to Long Island was longer than I remembered. We took the Long Island Expressway in the morning, before the weekend traffic built up, and he drove his own car, a low black sedan, no driver. His hands on the wheel, sleeves folded to the elbow, tan, tense forearm. That was the first thing I caught myself looking at for too long. The second was the way he tuned the radio to a classical station, low, and let me pick the silence whenever I wanted. We talked about things without weight. The name of the cafe he went to on 80th. The first time he had cooked alone, at 14, when his father had fired the cook in the middle of a Christmas dinner. The joke Wren had made about Phelan 2 days earlier. Phelan had stopped by Holloway Events to drop off a contract and lingered 15 extra minutes talking about kinds of paper. "That's going somewhere," Thane said. "Phelan and Wren? Phelan's already asked me 3 times this week if Miss Calloway has a boyfriend. She's going to kill him. He knows." I laughed. He glanced at me from the side, briefly, and turned his eyes back to the road. The house in East Hampton appeared after a sandy curve, low, modernist, dark cedar walls and floor-to-ceiling glass, facing the ocean on the other side of a wide dune. The pitched roof opened up to the January sky, light gray, cold without being sharp. The indoor pool he had mentioned once was in a glass annex on the right, and the smell of the sea came in through the door before we did. Juno Breyer opened the front door before Thane reached for the key. She was a woman in her mid-50s, short, gray hair cut close, navy apron, hands dusted in flour. She looked at me with an open curiosity that was nothing professional. "Miss Holloway?" "Marin, please. Marin." She wiped her hands on the apron. "Welcome. I picked up fresh bread in the village. Coffee's ready. Thank you." She looked at Thane with old affection. "Main bedroom for the 2 of you?" Thane blinked half a second, looked at me. I felt Wren laughing somewhere inside my head. "Main bedroom," I said before he did. Juno smiled without showing her teeth and went off to the kitchen. I went up with the bag behind Thane. The main bedroom looked out at the ocean through a whole window. Low bed, light gray linen sheets, an aged leather armchair near the window with a book on the arm. It was poetry. It was Mary Oliver. There was a paper marker poking partway out. "The same book," I said. "I brought it from the office. You carry it around." "I do. Why?" He looked at me from the bedroom door, bag in my hand, winter dress to the knee, hair loosened by the drive. "Because it's the only thing my father never read." I set the bag down. I didn't answer. Later, in the kitchen, Juno poured me coffee in a white ceramic mug and stayed a few steps away from me, hands clasped, hesitating about whether to speak or not. "You're the first," she said, finally, in a low voice, while Thane was in the pool annex checking the heating. "The first what?" "The first he's brought here." I looked at her. "In how long?" "In 5 years, since his father died," she breathed. "Maybe longer." I didn't answer. I drank the coffee. She went back to the bread. That night, the 2 of us had dinner alone in the kitchen. Thane opened a bottle of white wine and put his hand on my waist from behind while I chopped the onion. He chopped the tomatoes. I burned the onion. "It was supposed to brown," I said. "It browned. It browned too much. The smoky flavor gets better with wine," he said, without turning to me. I laughed out loud, laughed at his profile holding back his own. "You're a terrible man, Thane Ashford." I know. It was the first time in months I hadn't thought about the clock. Saturday morning, it drizzled. In the afternoon, it cleared. We walked along the beach after lunch. Medium wind, wet sand, gulls overhead. I had a thick wool coat and low boots. He had a navy coat and his hands in his pockets. The dune between the house and the sea was wide enough for us to walk side by side without my feeling crowded. "What was she like?" I asked, without looking at him. "Your mother, before." "She played piano, more than me, better than me. Schubert was her specialty." He scratched his eyebrow with his thumb knuckle. "She used to laugh loud on purpose when my father was home, because he believed the women in his family laughed quietly. It was her way of teaching me you were allowed to make noise." I looked at him. He was looking at the horizon line. "She stopped laughing when I was 10. He swallowed dry. "Not all at once. Slowly. She wasn't always like that." I didn't push. I filed the sentence away. I walked a few more meters and stopped. "I came home early from a trip in Boston," I said, looking at the sea. "It was 5 in the afternoon. It was his cat's birthday. The cat birthday joke was ours, his and mine, for 2 years. She was in my bed. His shirt was on the kitchen floor. He was in the bathroom." I breathed. I didn't cry. I grabbed the coat, left, called Wren in the elevator. She picked me up. I cried 6 days later, at her kitchen sink, washing a pot. "Marin, I'm not done. No, I swore I wouldn't trust any man until the day I died." I looked at him. "I'm breaking the oath on the beach of a billionaire's house in January. It's comical." He didn't laugh. "You can break it halfway." "You can't." "No, you can't, Thane." He held out his hand. I took it. We walked to the house holding hands, without talking, and the rain came back in the last 100 meters. We went in, took off our coats. He stood in the living room, near the fireplace Juno had laid out that morning. He lit it with a match. The fire caught on the second try. Light climbed up the dark wood walls. "Maren," he turned to me. "The engagement can stop being fake whenever you want." The line hung in the air for 2 seconds. "It stopped being fake a while ago," I answered. He didn't smile. Smiling would have been small. He crossed the 3 steps that separated us and stopped a hand's breadth from me. Tall, quiet, breathing slowly. His hand rose to my cheek and stayed there. Full weight. No rush. "You sure?" "I am. Maren, if I kiss you now, we don't come back down." "I know." He kissed me, not like in the car at the plaza, without the held-back hurry, without the asking. It was the kiss of a man who had spent 3 weeks measuring his want, and finally had permission to stop measuring. His hand slid up the back of my neck, undid the bun, let my hair fall down my back, and the other hand settled at my waist and pulled my whole body against him. We went up the stairs without agreeing to. The living room stayed with the fireplace burning behind us. In the bedroom, the bedside lamp came on by reflex from him, and he turned it off again. The window looked out at the ocean. The fine rain hit the glass without sound. The gray linen bed opened like a page that had been waiting. He turned me to face him near the window, his big hand open on my cheek, his thumb dropping slowly across my mouth. He didn't speak. I undid the first button of his shirt, and he let me. I undid the second. He took my hand and pressed it over his chest, over his heart, and held it there for 2 seconds. "You feel it." "I feel it. Now you know." He kissed me again, slower, deeper. He lowered the zipper of the back of my dress without hurry, with a care that looked like engineering, and the dress fell down my arms. The cold from the window touched my shoulder, and his mouth, the next second, covered the place the cold had touched. Slow, warm, lingering. "Maren," he whispered against my shoulder. "I'm here." "Say it." "I am." "You are what?" "Yours." He lifted me effortlessly by the waist, 2 hands' breadth off the floor, and carried me to the bed. His hands memorized every inch like a man learning a path he was going to want to walk in the dark later. I held the back of his neck between my 2 hands and breathed against his hair, slowly, and for the first time in a long time, my body wasn't on alert. It was home. It was frightening. It was new. His skin tasted of salt from the wind off the beach. His breathing sped up as mine slowed down. His hands trembled once at my waist, and he noticed they had trembled, and rested his forehead on my shoulder for 2 seconds to steady them. "I've never had this," he whispered, low, into my collarbone. "Maren, I've never had this. I didn't know." "Me neither." The giving was slow. It was whole. His weight over me was real. Not symbolic, not gentle, real. And I felt it in my rib cage, in my hips, in the press of his knees parting mine. The rhythm started slow, almost hesitant, and I heard my own breathing leave as if it had forgotten the way. He fit his mouth into the curve of my neck, and I felt the heat of his tongue against my cold skin, and the contrast made me close my eyes and grip his back harder than I had meant to. His hand found mine against the sheet, above my head, and laced his fingers into mine. And it was that gesture, more than anything, that undid me. His big hand holding mine while his body moved, while I felt his breath speed up against my shoulder, while the rhythm built, and I stopped thinking about anything that wasn't the exact pressure of him against me. I went first. I went with my mouth open against his chin, no sound, and my whole body contracted around him, and he held me through it, his hand in mine, his forehead on my shoulder, the whole weight of his chest on mine. He came 2 breaths later, low, muffled into my hair, with a word that might have been my name and might have been nothing at all. We lay still. We didn't move for a stretch I couldn't measure. His hand stayed in mine. His forehead stayed on my shoulder. The fine rain stayed on the glass. He rolled to the side, slowly, pulled me against his chest, covered both of us with the linen sheet, rested his chin on the top of my head. "Maren, I don't need you to be my fiancé. I need you to be mine." "I am." He kissed the top of my head, fell asleep before I did. I lay awake for another 20 minutes, ear against his chest, listening to his heart slow down, and thought about his line on the beach. She wasn't always like that, and the way he had swallowed the rest of the story. He was holding something about Vesper he hadn't named yet. Not today. I didn't care today. I fell asleep thinking that one day I would ask for the whole story, and that he would give it to me. Sunday morning, 8:30, I came down to the kitchen in his light blue dress shirt and nothing underneath. Bare feet on the wood floor, the cuffs of the shirt rolled 3 times. I started the coffee maker, sliced bread, cracked 2 eggs into a bowl, looked for salt in a ceramic jar I had seen Juno reach into the day before. Thane appeared in the kitchen doorway in gray sweatpants and a white t-shirt, hair tousled, eyes half closed with sleep. "You stole my shirt." "I did. Looks good on you." "It does." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, locked his arms around my waist from behind, propped his chin on my shoulder, and stayed there while I scrambled the eggs. 2-day stubble. It scraped my neck. I closed my eyes for half a second. "Marin, yeah, I burn an onion much better than you do." I laughed. Laughed loud. Laughed the kind of laugh that doesn't get out in a city apartment. The kitchen door opened. Juno walked in with a basket of fresh bread from the village, saw the two of us pressed together near the stove, turned her face to the window with the subtlety of a woman who has seen enough in one lifetime to know when to see nothing, and set the basket on the counter carefully. "Fresh bread." "Thank you, Juno." "Coffee ready?" "Almost." "I'll be back in 10 minutes." She left. Thane laughed quietly in my ear. She saw. She didn't. She saw. "Shut up, Thane." We had breakfast at the kitchen island, side by side, with the low January light coming in through the glass door to the backyard. The eggs came out less terrible than the onion of the night before. Juno's bread was dense, dark, still warm. He passed me the fig jam without my asking. In the afternoon, we sat together at the old upright piano in the living room. I tried the Brahms Berceuse from memory. I hadn't played since I was 16, maybe 17, and I missed the tempo 5 times. Thane laid his hands over mine and corrected my pinky onto the right note. He laughed at all 5 times. Juno walked through the room twice, gonna fix something that clearly didn't need fixing. That night, in the living room, fireplace going again, I sat on the floor between his knees with my back against the sofa, and he read me, in a low voice, a Mary Oliver poem about wild geese. His voice was deeper at low volume. Every comma had weight. When the poem ended, he closed the book and rested his hand on my head. "Marin, I don't need you to be my fiancé. You said that yesterday." "I know. I'll say it again every time I need to." "Why?" "So you'll believe it." I turned my head to look at him, chin on his knee. "I believe it." "You believe it." "I believe it." He kissed my forehead. Slow. No performance. Sunday night, driving back to Manhattan in the dark, he held my hand over the gear shift for almost the whole trip. I thought about his line on the beach. She wasn't always like that. I thought about Juno in the kitchen, the first one in 5 years. I fell asleep with my head against the passenger window, and his hand still in mine. Hey, Kay here. That's it for book 1. But guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee.
I thought she was my piece. For 3 months, the penthouse stopped feeling empty. Burnt coffee became something for her to laugh about, and I almost believed we had won. Until the message came. Anonymous. Cruel. A photo of her with another man, a pregnancy test, and a question crafted to destroy me. "Are you sure that baby is yours?" When she walked in that night, holding a box in her hands, the look of a woman about to drop a bomb on her face, I already knew she was pregnant. What I didn't know was whether this was the beginning of my family, or the proof that I was the last to find out about the betrayal.
Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to catch the upcoming ones, look for Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channels are Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. With love, Kay.